In fact, I would almost call you Mayfair. That's
No, it does. I don't.
Welcome to the College of Complexes. My name is Tim, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our festivities tonight. We're having a presentation of the American Monetary Institute. We'll get into that first. The College of Complexes consists of the following format. Number one, we'll have a brief announcements period. Two, our speaker will speak up to about an hour. Three, we'll then have our infamous question and answer period where we ask that you have questions. And finally, we'll have rebuttals, which Dar's meaning that it'll be a rebuttal for a certain specified amount of time. There is a $3 tuition charge for the college. And we also ask that you purchase a little bit of food and drink with the restaurants because they do welcome us here every week. And there are two rules to the college. One is one fool at a time. And the second is no personal attacks. With that, Charlie, if you're ready with the announcements, go ahead, please.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to meeting number 3,818 of the College of Complexes, the playground for people who think. Although I am not a capitalist, I will give an advertisement for our upcoming programs. On May the 24th, next week, longtime Chicago activist Tom Dresser will be talking about culture wars in the United States in the past and in the present. On May 31st, environmental activist Jane Bodart will be discussing the topic of the advantages and disadvantages of small modular nuclear reactors for energy. Small modular nuclear reactors. Transitioning then into June. On June the 7th, we will have an open microphone. It'll be the 10th anniversary of 10 years that Trump entered officially politics, announcing his candidacy for president on the 16th. So we're going to have open mic. So prepare your keynote speeches and your assessment of the Trumpism. On June the 14th, we're going to take a look at the U.S.-Cuban relations over the entire history of U.S.-Cuban and U.S. relations. On June the 21st, Tim Bulger will be looking at the most famous encyclical of the Vatican See regarding capital and labor employment issues. That's June 21st. Read it in advance. June 28th is presently open. If you'd like to speak, please supply a title and a written description of what you'd like to talk about. Transitioning then into July. On July the 5th, I will be talking on why we should either invade or annex Canada to become a part of the United States. I've examined the totality of the issues, pro and con, obstacles, and reasoning for annexation of Canada into the United States, either as states or territories. On July the 12th, then, we haven't had one in a while. We'll be having a debate. David Ramsey Steele versus Eric Mao on his China capitalist. Is it a capitalist society or country? Okay, that leaves 2 dates open in July. If you'd like to speak, thank you, Tim. Take it away.
Okay, Charlie. Just give me a second here to get everything set. Okay, hang on here. We're gonna quickly switch cameras. I'd like to welcome our speaker tonight, for the American Monetary Institute. That will, I'm sorry, I'm just forgetting the, okay, yeah, we got, Stephen Walsh, the American Monetary Institute is a publicly supported charity founded in 1996 to present the results of one of our research in a manner and understandable to the average citizen, leading to monetary reforms which bring forth a greater level of economic justice and a more equitable, efficient functioning of government. I won't read the rest. Let's just welcome Stephen Walsh to the podium here tonight. And if you're ready, Steve, I'll get you the thing here. So just bear with me for a second while I okay, hang on here. Just bear with me for a minute, please. Bear with me, please. Okay, and we got that going. Just got to do one more thing here, so my apologies, please. Okay, Stephen, I'm going to give you the microphone and take it away.
No, it'd be all set. Yeah. Thank you, Tim. And for decades and decades, continuing ways towards intellectual thinking, in Chicago, and it's every community around the country should have an organization like this. It's very much needed today too. Just a quick word, I've spoken here maybe about 10, 15 years ago on the same topic. There's another person, Steven Zarlanga, whose book I have, has spoken here and or at the Lincoln Restaurant. And before that, back in the 80s, my father's actually spoken here, and he was a regular attender. He enjoyed being with everyone here. Charles, what? Where was that? It was at the Lincoln, as I recall it. I believe somewhere in there, yeah. Okay. We have a big topic today. And so
Gonna cover all of it.
okay, we'll cover quite a bit.
Is
The first thing, what I'm gonna do with my style tonight will be, rather than I've put on conferences and I've gotten to know a lot of authors and a lot of talkers, a lot of people who presented, and I'm just going to share their books. I'm going to and tell you a bit about how the field is, and we'll do it chronologically. I'm going to start back in time, and so we'll start in the Middle East. In Mesopotamia was basically considered the first cultural area of the Near East. Then comes Babylonia and the Hittites and other groups. But back then it's the beginning of urbanization. And actually the urbanization that influences that area comes actually from Ukraine. There was an early urban culture around the Napa River. People would, little chiefdoms got along there. And one of the key things that allows for the rise of urbanization is storage. You have to have a place to store goods. And how do you interact with that storage as a community? And the chiefdoms were more independent along the Napa River. But when their influence got to the Tigris Euphrates rivers and and the other and the alluvial plains of the area, they decided they had to come together and be more united. So you would have the chiefs or chiefdoms, and you'd have then a chief of chiefs or a lord king, if you will. And the storage at the palace becomes considerable, and what you're storing is usually barley that you produced as a farmer, or it could be wheat or other grades, but barley, and they would also need things for building and other things. And so to trade further distances, they learned to use silver and bullion. So it'd be silver by weight. It wasn't silver coins yet, though that hadn't begun. And this is because we're at around 5,500 years ago. So, and I'm going to go to using the term BC. So at 3,500 BC, or 5,500 years ago, roughly, you have barley, and it's a real interesting society. What happens there? They did try war. They tried to conquer. They needed stone. They needed minerals. They needed salt and other goods from the mountains. They ended up learning to trade, but first they started to try to do it as in a warrior way and take control. And they found out the nomads were too difficult to control, and they were too nomadic, and they had too many advantages in warfare. But they were very willing. And they found out they could go with trading, and it was a way to get by, avoiding war. Something else, but there were plenty of wars going on. So what's called the early Bronze Age, from 3,500 to 2,200 BC, they lived a life, and labor was precious because you needed labor for everything. And it was a time of when you could call it a Garden of Eden. And it wasn't easy. You wouldn't trade your life today for living back there. It was very difficult. But for 1,300 years, people got along pretty much. And when I dream or think about the history back then and how to live, and I can go into that a little bit, but 1,300 years is 25% of the total human civilization. And labor was appreciated, war was to be avoided, and since labor is so appreciated, debts were forgiven. You would have jubilees by the Lord Kings because you needed to have people to work together, and you didn't want to have farmers who might go off or work for another entity. You wanted them to be loyal to you. If the husband dies in some battle, the children and the mother, they would be taken up by the palace. The mother might be work on sewing woolen goods or other goods that could be traded with the more nomadic mountain people. The children could work to help with the sheep and in other farming aspects. So there was a place for everyone. And there was another interesting concept back then. They did not have a sense of property. They had a sense of land tenure, but not property. And it was a golden age. And these quotes, I came across, and where I'm coming from is that we did a huge number of excavations, mostly England and the United States, back in the 19th century, going on France and Germany back then too, but coming up in the Middle East, all, the Ur Chandeliers, the Tigris Euphrates, the palaces, Egyptology, all of that. And it's all been in scholarly writing, and it's hard to go through. I have, believe it or not, I have 4 master's degrees in anthro, archaeology and cultural and linguistics, and I've gone through that material, and it's a hard go reading it. But Michael Hudson, who's worked with Harvard, the Peabody Museum, has made it accessible for the layperson in very recent books. His earlier stuff where he's editing, it was all scholarly, it was a hard read. He's now writing for the layperson. And I just want to read you 2 quotes to get our imaginations going. And these come from two Roman historians, right around the time of Christ, right before and then actually during Christ's time. The first one is by Seneca, the Roman historian. There was once a fortune-favored period when the boundaries of nature lay open to all for men's indiscriminate use, before avarice and luxury had broken the bonds that held mortals together. You can think of that applies today. I'll read that once again. Or actually, I'm going to read both of these. I'll read the next one too. This one's written by Virgil. And no plowman tilled the soil, nor was it right to portion off the boundaries of property. Men shared their gain, and earth more freely gave her riches to her sons who sought them not. So back to what they're referring, and we don't know what exactly they're referring to. They could be referring to early Roman times, or it could be referring back to earlier times before then. We might want to think of it a little bit for our own thinking right now as sort of like a Garden of Eden. Not that we want to live at that time. Our lives are much easier now. I'd rather go to the hospital here than there. But you have a sense of it in terms of sharing and caring for others. And we spent 1,300 years not having jubilees, debt forgiveness, and the value of every human, because every human could give some labor. So it was a very, very different world then. But the key point here is that the idea of jubilee and how long we should have property rights and copyright rights, etc. We need to think about that. And when does the society get to have the great benefits and everyone? And to keep us cohesive, maybe we don't need so many rich people for doing that. So those ideas are in Temples of Enterprise. So early on, no sense of property and avoidance of war and a great appreciation of labor. His next book is The Collapse of Antiquity. And from 2200 to 1600, the Middle Bronze Age, you begin to lose that sense of the rich wanted. There's some that the chiefs want more for themselves, and they're in competition a bit with the king and Lord King, and that goes on. That goes all the way on until, believe it or not, Constantinople and the beginning of the Crusades, where there is debt forgiveness, and there's debt forgiveness in small ways, all the way to the Crusades to right society again. When you have property ownership as we have today and contract law as we have today, we have debt peonage, and we're in very difficult circumstances today. The question is then, how are we going to live with this? How can we go forward? As Michael Hudson would want to say, people who can't pay their debts won't pay their debts. And what are we going to do? How are we going to make this? So these are beginnings of things that for us to have a dialogue on, and it's an open question. We have to think about this today, and these are some suggestions that are coming from Michael Hudson and the scholars of the Middle East. Moving on. To mention that the American Monetary Institute was started in 1996. It was started by a fellow named Stephen Zarlenga, and a Chicago Italian American. And he lived on the west side. His family ended up moving to the suburbs. And he was a book lover, and he owned a bookstore in a few different places. And he was well off twice in his life, but before his father died, he told his father, I'm going to write about the history of money. And he came at money as a libertarian and as sort of a gold bug. He was a very, matter of fact, numismatists, coin dealers, very strongly much followed Zarlanga, and he could actually call the gold market because he knew how to be a big time investor between Europe and whatnot and investing in gold. But what he learned in his 12 years of research was that perspective, the libertarian and counting on gold to be and coins to become a money, that wasn't the way to go. He learned about what needed to be was fiat. The government, society could be a community that you have to work together in community or society to create a money system that can work well for all. And so he went through history, the same history that Hudson would, and Hudson and Zarlanga on these points get along perfectly well because they're listening to the available literature from archaeology, anthropology, and they're not armchair scholars who are guessing at things, but they're looking at the best of evidence that they, as scientists, have found over the last 200 years of research. So he goes through the entire history of money and looking at the value of a coin. What was the cost to the king or to Caesar or the person in the past to turn it into a coin? And what did it cost to get that coin? And then what was its face value? The king said, well, here's a coin. It has so many grains of silver in it, or platinum, or gold, or copper. What is the value when I give it to you? What is the face value? So you have, and the technical term for this is called seigniorage. It's the difference between the cost to make money and what is its value in society. And its value in society, the face value, is usually established by the rulers of that area. It could be the king, the Caesar, the queen, etc. I can give you lots of examples in history when we ask questions, if you like. Zarlanga covers this idea of seigniorage, and he covers good governance and how people could use the seigniorage for the realm and for society rather than take advantage of. So when new money is coming into it, it's coming in through this the powers that are in society, and we can go through various times and periods to cover this, in which he does in this book, chapter by chapter. And it's to give everyone, it's to make money neutral for everyone, make money fair and neutral for everyone in society. And we've lost that. We've lost that today, and we'll go over that. And he explains that in great detail. This book was first written in German in 1999, and then it was published in English in 2002. In 2005, he called out to the world basically and said, come to Chicago, Roosevelt University downtown. And he said, we have to talk about this. We have to gather. His book had gotten out to enough people that about 100 people came from around the world, and they met there, and we've met there every year. We've met every year since then. This year will be in September, will be our 21st conference. So I have extra copies if you really want to understand the history of money and you have one source to go to. This is considered like the Bible to go to. And I have an addendum that goes with it. It's a little more updated than the addendum we put in here. This addendum is too Federal Reserve oriented, and we had better knowledge since the addendum was put in. This is an original one without an addendum, though. those copies are available. And what I might do is display these out, and maybe before the night closes, people can look at these books and have some time for that. I'm going to jump up towards, what I want to do is take a direction and come up and give you a sense of that cost of money. And I'm going to do it in a little bit of detail. And I'm going to pick on another author here, and it's Richard Lester. He wrote this in the 30s, 1939. He published it. This is a reprinting from 71, and it's called Monetary Experiments. And he gives a wonderful history of Canada's first money system that came out of playing cards. They were desperate for money, and so the leaders in Quebec cut up playing cards, signed their names to it, and that became the money for Canada originally, starting in 1688. In 1690, something interesting happened. England had Massachusetts Bay Colony. It hadn't been divided up into sub-colonies of Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island yet. And so Massachusetts Bay Colony was being told by the Crown in England, by William III, we're going to go up and ransack Quebec, and we're going to make it British. We're going to take it away from the French, because they're in their 100-year on and on war. And so they got 2,000. This is an interesting monetary story, because it begins a new era of money that it establishes in an ongoing way for the world. It had started earlier in Italy, in Florence, and it had started earlier and was strong for a good while in China. But it really takes root at this point, and here's the beginning of it. So they got 2,000 Bostonians, and they became the soldiers. They got 32 ships. They paid off the merchants to get, to bring the goods and the supply. And the payoff wasn't exactly immediately. It was going to come with the booty taken from Quebec, because they were obviously going to strongly overpower Quebec. So those 2,000 soldiers and those 32 ships head north from Boston in 1690 in late summer or early summer, and head up to Quebec. Not much of a problem. But sure enough, the French in Quebec get wind of this, and they use that playing card money that I just described a moment ago to pay each other, to pay their people, to get a cannon from over here and men from over here. And they organized, they got wind that this was coming, the ships are on their way, and so they took the high points along the Quebec, or on the St. Lawrence Seaway there, and they pretty much became ready. So when those 32 ships came into view, they were met with artillery, and a battle ensued, and they tried to, in different ways, take power from the French. And they set up troops from behind and front, and all of this was stopped. And their ships, meanwhile, were being hobbled by the ships, by the cannons that are at perfect locations that really had a hard time being hit from the wall. And so the ships were hobbled too much. And the English decide we have to return. The people who are leading this for William III decide to head back. They get back to Boston, and now the Crown's got to decide, holy mackerel, what are we going to do? We have to pay off these merchants. We don't have the booty. We have to pay off these soldiers. We're going to have a mutiny, and they have guns on them too. What are we going to do about this? What they did is they created paper money. And to get the people to accept it, they said, this paper money is redeemable in gold, in silver, and you'll get, but it's gonna be the money we're paying you with now. And it became accepted because they needed money. The crown was starving those colonies of money, and so that paper money was very readily accepted. So much so is they removed the gold and silver clause. That was the money, the paper money without even any redeemability in gold or silver became the money and what we call today the fiat money. It's the money because government declares it's the money. So that's what you have. And from 1690 to today, we've had a paper money system in the Western world. Okay. So enough with Richard Lester. Well, he then goes into, I'll just mention this is, he goes into the history of Pennsylvania. And actually, I want to get to this concept of seigniorage too one more time. The seigniorage to make those playing cards was very little. It's a few decks of playing cards. But their face value out in the community was tremendous. If you had a 9 of clubs, it might be 9 francs. And it was the money, and it became the money in France, and it became the money all the way to the French Indian Wars in 1755 to 1763, which in the New World ended in 1760. That was the money. It was the Canadians would accept it as fiat, but not totally, because in the summer, if you wanted to get gold or silver, the France would try to get a load of silver and gold to Quebec so that they could use real money too, or the coins. And same thing England does in the New World, but they're starving the New World a little bit more than the French were. But that's another longer conversation. But when Pennsylvania, and that's where I've done most of my studies in the colonial period, or where I focus, because we have a great data, all sorts of information from various sources. It costs and think of it, in Pennsylvania you had the Quakers. Every time from 1690, what was the cause of having a new paper money system? War. And it was war up until 1723. But the Quakers said, we're not going to have a paper money system for war. It would be repugnant to their value system that they just started this colony by William Penn. And so they told the Crown, we need paper money. We're suffering here. Back in 1721, Durkinson, the mayor of Philadelphia at the time, said, I don't know how we're going to make it through the winter. So finally, the Crown relents, or Whitehall and their trade group says, okay, you guys can have your paper money. And so in 1723, there was an issue of 15,000 paper notes. And that was so successfully distributed, they thought it would take maybe 6 months. It was totally used up in 3 weeks. People came in and they would put 1/3 the value of their house or 1/2 the value of their property, and they would borrow from this land bank. And the Pennsylvania put 20% of the money that they created straight into circulation by buying things. And that ratio was sort of nice, because then they learned very intelligently how to make sure inflation wouldn't take place. And that gets into a longer story. We're going to skip over that. But the main point around seigniorage, though, is that the cost of that paper money system, they had 4 trustees that came out of Pennsylvania, and their bank was just a really safe home with a shelf. And that shelf was called the bank, period. That was the bank. And they would go to the bank and they would make these loans. on certain days and times, and people would come and get it. And everything was needed. They needed a medium of exchange to move trees and cut down trees and started farm fields, and to get the trees to the shipping yards where they could be used or put into ships. And there were woolen goods and metal goods that England brought in that stayed on the harbors because there wasn't a medium of trade. So Pennsylvania then, over the next 20, 30, 40 years, probably became the most richest place on earth in terms of per capita and people living well and being taken care of. They had an almshouse in as early as 1709, but in 1729, they made another one. They made a hospital. They built a hospital in 1741 for people coming into the colony who needed a place to stay and who were sick coming off the ship. Have some time on this island at a hospital, and we'll check you in after. So there was a caring. Franklin in 1740 was able traveling around in his duties, postmaster and whatnot, and helping develop it. He was a little bit of like a central bank. He wrote The Necessity of a Paper Money System in 1729, and he could outsmart the usurers, the private individuals who wanted to make money by loaning it into circulation. So he knew how to make the advantages for society, for the assembly, and the assembly got rid of their head tax and their one other tax, the two biggest taxes that could be put on people. And since they were represented, the people were represented, those were taxes they'd have to put up with. Oh, a voting tax to vote. You would get, no, a head tax was for voting, and then there was something similar to like a land property type of tax. There was two taxes. They could get rid of those. They kept two taxes, though. They kept the tax on slaves because they didn't want an increase in slaves. And second, they kept the tax on beer and barley because they wanted their local beer people. This is tariffs now. They wanted their local people to have an advantage with their barley and making of beer, and not to have outside competition. So those were the two taxes they kept. So anyhow, this is a wonderful book on the colonial period, and the cost of that money system was 4%, and 96% they could spend into circulation, or the 20% they'd spend, and the other part, it was 37,500 pounds, English pounds, and it went up to 80,000 pounds in the 1730s. And they figured out what would be the right amount so there wouldn't be inflation. And they learned how to keep it in that way. And it was their assembly, it was their people just caring for their society. And the question is, how can we do that for society today? They ran a better monetary system, less inflation than we've ever had during the United States history. And how can we do it better today? It's an important piece of history.
Ben Franklin in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania.
Yeah. And it's the second chapter. It's a long chapter in this book. And this is written from the 1930s when we're in the midst of our depression, when they're looking around, and they're also trying to bring back the idea of the greenback, which was the money created by the government so we could be in the Civil War. And there's a whole story around that. I could get into the Civil War and greenbacks, but that's the same as Lincoln says we can have our own. If we buy something from England, we have to buy it in pounds, get their money, and then when we buy it, that money leaves us, and we have a burden with them. But if we can create our own money, and we can put ourselves to work, and we can create the metal and the steels we need, the profits are in the country, and it's a win-win situation. And it's how do we think of ourselves as a society winning together rather than small groups and individuals winning. winning in small numbers, like the rich people of today. I'll say it that way. Okay, it's just, I'm gonna go fast now. But to get an understand of money at that time coming up through US history, I'm gonna mention this. I gave it to a student of mine. He has it at his home. I couldn't take it, but I made a photocopy. It's called Moral Economies of Money by Jacob Feining. And he does, how do you have a moral economy? How do you have a fairness in a money system? And it goes from the colonial period up through FDR. And he felt our strong last moral economy was the greenbacks. And we slowly lose that moral economy where people understand on a daily basis how we can be moral around money. Oh, and an interesting person today, just published this year, is Leah Downey's book, Our Money, Monetary Policy as If It Matters. She looks at the Federal Reserve and the central bank from the Fed starting in 1913. So it's a very wonderful continuation. And basically, she's looking at good governance. What do we need to do to have a democracy? What do we need to have? She's got to be maybe 30, 31 years old. I'm trying to work with her greatly because we need her and people like her to help lead this country. She comes from North Carolina. She's done her research in England, and but those are the young people we need to find to hand off our situation, and they understand what's going on in the world today in terms of the international things, and we'll get up to that because I'm going to go a little faster. We'll get up to the present. Matter of fact, we'll get there right now. The situation has gotten so bad in the monetary system, it's basically, and I'll get into it a little bit, we're in a failed monetary system, but it just keeps eking on. And both doctorates in economics, but in banking, and one is a lead central banker and the other is a banker sociologist. And they couldn't use their names, so they just called themselves Jonathan McMillan. And if you go to I'm going to pass out website list. I have one for everybody here. And if you go to the AMI, all of these speakers I'm going to talk to, except for the ones that are long dead, Lester, for example, but many of these people now have been alive and have presented at the AMI. And so this person presented at the AMI anonymously because his job would be at risk. I've seen people lose their job at the Fed and in banking for being a whistleblower, if you will, or saying this isn't right for society. Oops, I'm looking at the title myself. Sorry about that. So these two very central, very bankers, they worked at the top banks in New York, London, and in Switzerland. And they wrote about the end of banking, and we can get into this. This first book of theirs is all about shadow banking and how new forms of money are taking hold. In the 2007, 8, and 9, 10 Great Recession, half the money that was created came out of financial corporations, and it wasn't directly money as we know it. So what's going on there? So there's a whole thing called shadow banking. It's alive and well today. It needs to be understood. Their second book, they said, okay, this was too technical, a little heavy, and shadow banking is a hard thing to understand because you get into repos and all of this verbiage that even the Bank of England, I think it was King or one of the Marvin King, said, I don't even understand what's going on myself. It gets so complex. So they came back, McMillan, then they wrote another book, Capitalism and the Market Economy. And if you go see their presentation on the AMI website, they do a history of central banks from 1694 to the present, and they talk about how there's runs on the whole banking system and how the whole banking system is fragile. And then they particularly look at what's going on today and how it is an extremely fragile system. Jamin Diamond says, we don't know when the next crisis is coming, and we don't know how to prepare for it. So, but we can talk about it. I still got my, we got a few more books and 20 more minutes, but we got a lot of times for questions and etc. What happens then is sort of interesting in this. We used to think about money in banking as who are the counterfeiters?
Right here.
And when private banks, instead of the government, creates our money, it's private banks, when they make loans, they're actually creating new money. They're not checking the vault. If I'll give you an analogy. If you think of, remember James Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life? And it's Christmas time and he wants to keep his bank open, but there's beginning to be a run on his bank. Say before that moment, if James Stewart is making a loan, someone comes into his bank and is making a loan. If he gets the money out of the vault in other places, that's a moral way of giving a loan. But if he, as a banker, says, I'm just writing out this check and I'm going to deposit it in your account and you can go spend it, that's not a moral or fair. He's actually creating new money at that moment. And banks support each other in the aggregate, supported by the Fed or central banks, the Western banking system, to do it that way. And because of that, these bankers who are highest up, who look at the whole system, they're not looking at the economics of one bank, they're looking at to get involved with the banks, the whole system is going to collapse. And they can show it very, very strongly, so it makes it obvious. You can feel it in your bones. So what about counterfeiting?
Right.
You would think if you're having a medium of exchange, you want your money, your new money, to come into circulation, much like it did for Pennsylvania. You want it to be wealth related, wealth of trees and wood, getting to the harbors, or woolen goods and metal goods from England, getting to our shores to help ourselves. So that's wealth-oriented money creation, and that's good creation. When cryptocurrencies are created, where is the wealth being delivered? When banks make loans so that they can divvy up those loans in other parts so they can buy what's called financial assets in the financial markets, those are called secondary markets, and that's not bringing wealth to us as society. We really don't need those secondary markets. Today, and this is the epitome of how bad it is, never in the Fed's history have they given interest on the reserves banks keep at the Fed. In 2006, the banks were in so much trouble, they passed a law, they got Congress to quietly pass a law that says we now have to give the banks interest on their reserves. So when they come in and they give a housing loan, or they get a deposit and they're going to sort of like spread that money around, they'll use that money and stretch that money, and they'll have 10 times traditionally that amount of money in circulation that would be okay with the Fed. But when Lehman Brothers broke down, they had 43 times as much money. And we're at similar numbers today. So the question is, what are we going to do? And basically, by the old definitions of our money system back in the mid-1900s, this would be called counterfeiting. We were based on a gold and silver system, supposedly, and we went off of it. And you had to then be very concerned about fiat money. And the legislator couldn't, we had legislators who were right Patman and people who understood money. And now today, there's no one. Ron Paul had some thinking about money back in the 1990s and early 2000s. But there's no one. Wright Patman was a wonderful Texas congressman who understood money for 40 years while he was in Congress. Now we don't have him. So we have to get good governance back, and it has to be with our legislature. And it doesn't matter how they're going to create the money, but they can't have money being created by rich people for their financial gain. And you cannot create money just to gamble in secondary markets. There has to be accountability. When the Fed started in 1913, they understood money, and there was something called the real bills doctrine. The Fed at that time would give loans to businesses right before when they'd be bringing products to the market. There's no products coming to the market because 80% is in the mortgage market. And if there's some new homes in it, fine. But it's money, it's them being safe and just going into the financial markets and where people owe money and making that work and just getting into debt. It's much like it's very similar to the farmers. You go and talk to the farmers in the Midwest and look at their towns and look at what kind of society are we building there. You have farmers, we've lost 900 farms since 1953. And they've gotten big and they had to become industrial to survive. But if we want organic farmers and healthy foods and non-polluted things, we have to give more money and direction towards that, and so that they can get fairer prices so they can make a decent living. And we have to understand economy and good governance, and we don't have that. So Leah Downey's book, and she's only 31, she's pointing these things out. Okay. Let me go on to some young people. I'll go through these real quick. This is Claire Mattei. She did what happened during World War I in England and Italy, and the labor markets in those countries before, during, and after World War I, and how austerity took over and the rich clamped down and stopped their labor movement, if you will. And it's called Capital Order, How Economists Invented Austerity and Paved the Way to Fascism. Fascism, for her, there was Mussolini. And we can say, and when you understand the history of World War I and what the Germans had to go through, you understand the rise of Nazism, or you get a perspective of how that could happen. This Mirza Baharadaran, she's a well-known lawyer. Biden actually nominated her to be controller of the currency. That means she would have 3,000 bank examiners to go into banks. I don't know if true what happened to them today exactly. I haven't kept up with everything going on. But the bank examiners got a check to make sure whatever rules we have in place, the banks are paying attention to them. So she's looked at libertarianism to where they gutted those rules, and it was saying companies and corporations to make the best decisions, and government wasn't to be trusted. And it looks at how the rich got the lawyers, got the politicians to start working for them rather than for the people. And as Aristotle said, money comes from nature. No, money does not come from nature, but comes from law. And we have to understand our laws. We have to know how to create good laws to work this out. And she goes over the laws. She has a lawyer's background to do this, a legal background, and it tells you how we failed as a nation. And it's going on steroids now, but we'll get to that. The Big Myth is another book on the same topic, except it goes back all the way to 1910 and electrification, and why wasn't electrification done in rural areas in a decent way for a decade or two. And it's a wonderful history, a general history. And these are all younger people, basically. Here we have some young people. Two authors, Stephen Maher and Scott Aquano, assistant professors. They made an interesting title. It might help sell a book or two. The Fall and Rise of American Finance. It's very profitable to be in the banks knowing how to make money. And the reason why it's so profitable and it's the rise of American finance is because the Fed is working for them. The Fed is making sure they cannot fail. But there is what's called an economics moral hazard there. The only way you can make it work right now is if you made those banks public. They have to be working for the public. If they're working privately, they've already failed. They're insolvent. And then how do you make it work for the public? That's what we need to think about. And how do you make it work? So that's Aquano. Michael Hudson, who wrote those two books on antiquity, came back and looked at the destiny of civilization today. And he looks at finance capitalism. That's the rentier. These are the people who just want to make money off of money. Money is an object. Money is not related to wealth here. Money is the goal. Industrial capitalism, this is where corporations can own, or you can have socialism. It's just his take. And his socialism is the idea of jubilee and going back to debt forgiveness and working it out. That's his most central point. I'll do this one last one, and then we'll open it up for questions. We're at 6:15, so we got another 5 minutes.
Right.
We just interviewed Robert Hockett. Actually, I can get you this interview. We didn't publish it yet, but I've sent it to some people. I have it, but we're getting it out as an organization. We want to rework this because what spread the Fed is what the Fed did right. The Fed was from 1913 to 1935 with the Banking Act of 1935. Away the Fed's power. Why did they have those 13 regional banks? Regional banks could allocate new money into the economy where productivity was needed. Why they stopped it is because they thought the overall money system failed even with that, and we needed to control money more in the aggregate. And the reason why this backward thinking came around is after World War I, Germany was paying so much in reparations that and money was flowing into this country from all over Europe based on loans of J.P. Morgan and the banking system. So you had a lot of inflow of money, and what do you get then? Inflation, right? And they couldn't see it. And then you had the roaring 20s and things are looking good. But then oscillations happened, and too much betting, and then the Fed or the banking system is making bets and just pushing the market as high as it could go, but then it fails. And the Fed today knows how to paper over the back then. The Fed back then didn't know how to paper over the problem, didn't know how to do QE. And so the problem failed and the banking system failed. And now all of the gears of society and production stopped, basically. We could go into that. So Hockett, who worked for the Fed, the IMF, he's a Cornell University professor in law. He understands the history of the Fed, how you've got to modulate and allocate funds and how the Federal Reserve should work. It should be working. And so he's tinkering with the system and redesigning it. So he's trying to do the right thing based on how things are working today. Some of the things he's counting on, though, actually Trump is dismantling now and taking away like some key ideas in his thinking that would help with the Fed being able to allocate. In his idea of the Fed would be what's called collaring prices at the Merc. Down at the Chicago Board of Trade, the Chicago Fed across the street would be buying and selling strategic crops that we need so that we could color prices so that the farmers are getting a decent price. They could work that way. We have even better models for how that could work. But this is his thinking from a lawyerly standpoint of how we can go into the future. He has a lot of important ideas, and he's the mainstream. He's trying to save the Fed, but we don't know. Now let's go to the more recent. We have 2 or 3 minutes.
If you need to extend a little bit, go ahead.
Okay. Right now we have a very special time. Think of what's going on in Europe. There's the European Union, there's the European Central Bank with those 17 countries involved with the euro. What's happening now, say in Germany, France, that because of these trade wars, we cannot count on the United States as we once did to play this game of being the backstop for the whole monetary system, because now we have a president who doesn't think about things like the Fed has to think about to maintain QE and paper over the system, even though it's failing. How are we going to go into the future? And so we need to go back and rethink things and figure that out. The choices you have, other countries have been suffering more. So what do you have? You have BRICS. It's Brazil, Russia, India, China,
South Africa.
South Africa, sorry, the SA and BRICS. And you have them forming another payment system so they don't have to do payments in the dollar. Now, does Western Europe want to work with Trump? Can they work with Trump, or do they want to work with the BRICS countries to create a new payment system? The BRICS countries, because of how strong our system is presently, our failing system is still surviving. But as Hockett points out, he's having our system fail much, much quicker. We don't even know how quick, but it's failing much quicker. And so when you have a new payment system, what we would call, in thinking about this, it's typically called the hegemony of the dollar because it's the preeminent currency in the world. But we should have a different type of currency in the world. Maybe it's the United Nations. So there's like about 4 different more different ideas, but I'm going to mention Franz Verhagen. He's presented a number of times. He's a Dutch fellow, wonderful, raised by a missionary family, and he's lived and worked in Africa and other places. But the Tierra solution is is let's not go for the BRICS. Let's stop this Western world, the failing system. Let's have a new money, a new dollar, if you will. We'll call it the Tierra, and it can be like a UN money. And we can work in this. And the benefit of creating this kind of money is that it can work for all people. And the U.S. can go back to living within its means and doesn't have to be the backstop for the world. Well, but it has to be concerned about wealth creation, creating money related to wealth and putting people to work instead of just making money an object where we just want more and more money, because that's what we measure things by. So this is thinking that has to take place, and we have to do it soon because turns out, if you ask my opinion, if you look at China's behavior in Africa and other countries, they're very much China first. You would end up having another dollar hegemony, yuan or lu, the Chinese money situation. So here's an interesting guy. Here's an Islamic solution. Here's a good friend. He's presented a number of times. He's extremely concerned about the young people and what's happening here and seeing them in debt, not getting out of debt peonage for the young, not enough money for pensions. And so he says his idea is, yes, we have to have a fair and moral economy and the way new money comes into circulation. But his idea too is we got to make the banks public. We can't have private banks anymore. So he wants monetary reform plus public thinking. And there's a great person named Koro Yamaguchi, who's a systems dynamic modeler from Japan. He's beginning to say the same thing. He just came out with a book like 2-3 weeks ago called Public Banking, and there's a long title after that. He wants monetary reform too. For people who are just learning about this, if you want a 101 book, there's a trilogy of these 3 books. It's by Dick Ignatz, who's been a part of the AMI for years. Caring for Souls and Neoliberal. This gentleman, Les said, oh, okay, well, I'll bring a book out for you. There's a minister who is a psychologist, and worked with patients, and he says, there's such a strong sense of individualism with my patients, and there's a sense of branding in this individualism, but the sense of soul of community, soul of the person is being lost. So he's very concerned about how our money is ruling things today and is taking a downfall. Here's another book, Bernard Latier and Gwendolyn, Creating Wealth, and this is local currencies. We need to work things nationally too, and they're so worried and scared. They think we got to go back to local currencies and focus there again, like we have in the past. The Ithaca dollar, the Wiener, the Wargo in Austria. And so there's this thinking, but we have different types of thinking going on. And what I brought for you is a sheet for everyone, and it's the AMI website. I got my name, my phone number in here. And if you want any of these authors and presentations, you just go to the website, click events, click a year, then scroll down and find all of their presentations. And I've been working to get better descriptions. I was an archivist in the state of Alaska, and I'm archiving 500 films right now and trying to get it right. So we have this history clearly in front of us and clearly in front of the young people who are students, and so we can educate them well again. There's the Alliance for Just Money, our sister organization. We started, since Erlanger started this in 1996, there's now 30 study groups in different countries. And they formed the International Movement for Monetary Reform. I'm working with them on a weekly basis. The best funded organization is called Positive Money in the UK. They have a public central bank. They know there's a serious problem, and they're working on it in an open fashion. The Fed is very private and very closed doors. If they're playing a poker game and they got their cards right up against their head, it's hard to get in and get their thinking. And there's a very different group, and I put them in here. It's Public Banking Institute, and these are people that are not worried about so much how money is created. They say, just let's make it all public. But we're allowing for banking to be in the future where people can do it privately and they can do it for their sense of profit. But we want them not to be or put money. They can truly invest other people's money. And we would have to set up like a Glass-Steagall Act for them. But anyhow, I'll stop with that. Before you leave, get this. And if there's any of these books, I got a few more. And I brought 3 books to sell if you wanted to get that history book. It's $90. And I'll sell it for a third off for $60 and no tax. It'll be a $60 payment straight out if you're interested in going into a deeper history of understanding money. But that's an hour, and I would forward. This isn't my favorite part. My favorite part now is your questions, because I want to be friends with all of you, because we have to work together. We have to build consensus. Go ahead.
I'd like to know what you think about cryptocurrency.
I wrote a paper on it and I published it last December. Crypto back then, as you may remember, went over $100,000. Two things you want money is, if you have like gold and it keeps inching up and higher in value, that doesn't make for good money, because if once you're getting it, you're starving it, you're making it more and more scarce, so the price is always going up. And that's what's happening to crypto. You only have 21 million Bitcoins that are possible. And so you're squeezing that, which makes the price go up and up, which you have been seeing. But it fluctuates wildly. So when it hit 107,000, a week later, it went back down to 93. If you're a banker and you're going to make a loan for someone's house, would you want to be betting with a money system that's fluctuating like that? Now you know why China said, even though they loved cryptocurrency, they was interested. They had a lot of people betting in on it and getting in on it. 2021, the Chinese government says, no cryptocurrency. It doesn't make for a good money system, and it's not for us anymore. We've made it illegal.
Okay, who else has got questions?
Yeah,
Okay,
do you think there's a conflict of interest with the Trump family, that they're with all this crypto and they're making billions on it?
Let me get to it right away. When you get into monetary reform and you put on conferences, and I help run an organization, I don't go after any politicians. I'm going to stay neutral. Yes, we have huge problems around crypto, and that's it. But it's not my place to say half the population's wrong and half the population's right. We're all Americans. We've got to just learn to educate ourselves and work together and build consensus together. We've got to find our brotherhood and sisterhood, and so let's walking through, as I just explained, that's what I feel about cryptocurrencies. We could go on to more of different types of cryptocurrencies. We could go into pre-mining and other aspects of cryptocurrencies and stable coins, but we only have, let's see where your questions go.
okay.
See where I'm coming from? It's a bad business. As I just explained to Tim, I answered Tim, I wouldn't want a currency. I would make it illegal in the United States, because it doesn't make for a good money system. You need to have a stable money system that you can rely on.
It's deregulated. It's not regulated.
Yeah, you're right. And they call it an asset. But then what happens when a bank starts buying a cryptocurrency and says, oh, we're going to make money on this. We're going to make money on this. Because remember, it's not wealth or the care for society. It's money profit. So, and now we fail, but we're holding on to $1 billion, what? $3 billion. See, and we're failing. Well, guess what, brother? The Fed is going to bail us out. Oh, why? They didn't. in 1970, money market mutual funds were supposed to never be bailed out. What happened in the Great Recession? They got bailed out. When you have a run, what these bankers explain, when you have a run on the system and many people are suffering and now people's pensions are in it, are you going to go in and paper it over, or are you going to let the Great Depression happen again as it did? So they are deciding to paper it over, and that's why I'm telling you today we have a failed monetary system. We have to think seriously about it and create something new.
Okay, Mike,
When you say paper.
louder, Mike.
Say paper over, you mean printing.
No, yes, I mean printing money electronically.
Well, digitized, my friend Robert.
Yeah, digitized.
Printing money.
Right, exactly.
And the big problem coming up now is Trump's gonna wanna give trillions of dollars away to the rich again. And what are we gonna do to cover their 5 trillion, whatever they're talking about? They're gonna have to print money. Digitally.
And then it happens is what they would call
That is something called fiscal policy. You give money to the super rich, or Obama prints. What's your question?
Yeah,
It's trying to distinguish between the
fiscal and monetary policy.
One clarification on term. You're calling papered over, it's called printing money.
Yeah, papering money is, I'm using that as
I'm sorry, I don't know why that's doing that.
euphemism for saying paper money. I'm just using it as a flash term.
Yeah, I don't like that. Sure.
right along here, the question.
Printing money.
Yeah,
Papered over.
Yeah. Printing money.
that's gonna remunerate.
What's your question? Can I answer it, please? Can I answer it, please? Can I answer it, please?
Printed money.
Yeah.
Printing money, right?
Here you go ahead. Somebody's got a cell phone.
You say money, the idea is you're printing a lot of, you have your printing press rolling.
Yes.
They don't have printing presses rolling anymore. They do, but it's only for 1%, 2% maximum of the money in circulation. What gets rolling is the electronic clearing system, and the Fed has a liability account, and it can create in the account all of the new electronic money it wants, and it just puts it into the economy to save the banks during the Great Recession or during the coronavirus with the American CARES Act.
And that's our $37 trillion debt, not today. Is printed money.
All right, who's got
Yes.
All right, let's go with Charlie. Let's go with Charlie online. Hang on, let me grab the mic from you so we can hear him. All right, Charlie, that's all. Okay, Charlie, we're gonna get you next here. So, if you're ready with your question, go ahead, Charlie.
Let me get my picture up. Oh,
All right, hang on.
just a simple question. Trump has destabilized international commerce.
Damn it, hang on.
Unlike the
Charlie, wait a minute. God damn it.
To it and I'll read.
It's all right, we're gonna get it here in a second. All right, Charlie, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you're trying to remain apolitical. However, the current administration is tampering with it, is seemingly going to disrupt the totality of all international commerce. And isn't that going to have some effect in generating another Great Depression?
Absolutely.
Okay. Go ahead, use the.
Absolutely, Charles. That's exactly what's going to happen. And the reason why okay, isn't what's going on with how Trump is putting money with the rich and all of his executive orders. He's creating a more and more failed system. You want to give it? You want to say it again, Charlie? Charlie? Or,
No, I think we got it.
yeah.
All right.
And he's asking me like, why do I have to stay neutral when there's such a bad thing happening right now? And that is because it's not a Republican or a Democrat problem. It's all of our problems. It's not a Green Party or a Libertarian Party. It's all of our problems. There's no party that represents a way forward right now. Actually, the Green Party platform, we have our monetary platform on the Green Party. Its candidates totally ignore it because they know they can't get anywhere with it. So while the Green Party has structure that's in their plank, their leadership doesn't follow it. I'm sorry to say. So there is no group out there. So when I talk to people from Montana, Nebraska, and rural, I work with rural farmers every Sunday night. And that's the last thing I can do is tell them, oh, how bad Trump is or something like that, or because of this, because I've just isolated half the population. And they won. So it's my job to work with everybody to always find the common sense and the truth together.
Okay, Jake, we're gonna get you next. Go ahead.
Okay.
Jake.
Okay. Huh.
Go ahead, Jake. Jake, you're now.
Okay.
Go
Can you
ahead.
hear? Can you hear me now? Okay. My
Yes, we
question
can.
is, there's something hidden in Trump's budget, unless I'm misunderstanding it. He wants to cut federal subsidies for the FDIC. Isn't that going to unless I'm misunderstanding that, isn't that going to destabilize the banking industry?
Go ahead.
Extremely, it would extremely destabilize the banking because the FDIC in our minds represents insurance. And it's the
Right.
FDIC that says we can have $250,000 in a bank. And if something happens, the government is going to give us $250,000. And you can go to Wintrust and they have 20 banks they work with. So you can do, and you can play the games and work with all of these individual banks but if you're super rich, you're a billionaire or something, that's just too much of a game. And so you find other ways to do it. Now, here's the deal. It's very important. It's an interesting point here. When we as monetary reformers think of a new system, we want you to go to your bank in the future under a monetary reform system and not have to worry about the FDIC. You would go to your bank and your banker would say to you, do you want to take risk with your money? And if you're willing to take some risk, rather than have an inflation target of, say, 2%, let's imagine right now, say the inflation target is 0%. And you go to the bank and you say, I have this money coming in, I don't need it right away, and invest it, which they do today. You instead of being part of Chase, you go to Morgan Stanley at that end of the bank.
We're all set now. Yeah. Yeah. That's
Okay.
a little.
So the idea there is that if you want to make a high interest rate, okay, we'll have you back money. We're having your money back credit cards. It's your money on the line, but that's the highest percent. But if something fails in the system, there's no security behind that.
Okay, who's next?
And more to go because I didn't get back to the FDIC. This is a real crucial point because this is where the rubber's going to meet the road in the future, and this is what it's going to affect you. So you better hear about it from me, or I want to give it to you now. Say you want a medium interest, you might back mortgages. And there's peer-to-peer lending on mortgages they can do now that go around the world. You could put in $1 and you'd be backing 1,000 homes for every $1 you put in. That was easily done in peer-to-peer lending schemes now. Say you want to make very little, you want to be really safe with your money, and maybe you do commercial paper that's of a preferred status. If that company is in trouble, all of its other assets are put on hold until they've paid off your loan first. And so that would be a lower interest rate. Then say you really want your money safe and you don't want to gamble with it at all. You put it in the bank and you do, basically it's like it is today. You put it in the savings account or checking account and you're next to no, or at this time, no interest, because you don't want to put it at risk. I want my money to always be there. And then the government guarantees that. And you don't need FDIC insurance. The government just tells the bankers, you're not doing anything. It's being held in security for those people, and you're not investing in it, period. It's over. And you don't need FDIC insurance anymore.
All right, let's do Karina, this gentleman, then I'm gonna ask a question.
All right, Karina, go ahead. We're not online, right?
Yeah, I think in some countries, is it Canada now that got rid of the penny and now your lowest is the nickel? You make adjustments for it, and so you make the adjustment around the nickel, but people can handle that. It's not, in my view, the most preferred way. I would rather make the money system so that you can use your currency as a denomination that's valuable to you. And like when colonial Pennsylvania, early money systems, they discovered they were making money in increments that were too much. The Quakers said, we're not making the money for them. We're making the money for the poor and the industrious. So the Quakers really established a high moral bar on their monetary system. And they made it, instead of it being like in Boston, I think it was 5 pounds. And I don't, and maybe they got some down paper money in Boston down to half of a pound. They were later in Pennsylvania, they were printing paper money that was 20 shillings, 12 shillings, a smaller amount. So they were trying to get to the idea of a penny, and pennies should be useful.
Who's next, this gentleman?
Well, how about Gaddafi? You have anything to say about him?
Yeah, so Hillary goes to the Gaddafi, and you know the story there already.
Back up a little.
Gaddafi comes from an Islamic background, and he wants dinar. He wants a gold-based money system. So he's put in, I thought it was like 120 billion in gold, and he was going to make this a reserve, and he was going to start putting in a new banking system, and that was going to be extremely competitive against the dollar. So the banking system is going to go against Gaddafi for that. Okay. Just got to think it in monetary, economic, banking terms for you. That's the answer to that. Gaddafi was dangerous for how he wanted to lead it.
Okay, who's next?
We need to do it anyhow. We didn't do anything to the cryptocurrency people or all of these other cryptocurrencies.
Thanks. I'm sorry about that.
Anywho.
All right.
But, for him, he was asking the next question. Sorry.
That's all right. Go ahead.
No, we're gonna go to George, Charlie, then we'll go to you.
All right, Jordan.
Currency is not tied to some sort of finite resource. Isn't it in effect theft because you're using your it's just paper, there's nothing back in this, there's no actual trade. So if I want to buy something from someone and my currency is not backed by anything, I'm not really giving that person anything in exchange. Is that theft?
Or would that be counterfeiting in terms of how
Sure.
law, morality and law, for example? Yes, and the example I should go to for that, and it's important, this is an important conversation for us to have that takes it one little notch further. There's something called central bank digital currency. And that's the idea, a central bank creates a digital electronic medium. You might be able, and depending on how there's lots of ways to design it. You could put it in a wallet, you could put it in the treasury, and you could give everyone, their IRS payments out of it, or you could do a universal basic income and say everyone gets $1,000 of this money, and that's just papering over, or that's that term the gentleman does. That's just putting money out there, but it's giving something for poor people. It's a medium of exchange, hopefully, to get wealth moving around in a good way. And crypto's trying to do that, and in some ways, and it's not backed by anything. It's considered an asset, but what kind of asset is it? Yeah. Now,
Well, you have to
central bank digital currency is something else, though. And let's go to that because it's similar, but there's a key difference. A central bank digital currency is just like a paper dollar, because the government says this piece of paper, which is, which was 4 cents. A few years ago, it was only 4 cents. It was 12 cents to make a $100 bill. The seniorage was $100 face value. So the difference was almost the amount of the face value was much greater. So the central bank digital currency, it costs nearly nothing to make that digital money, right? Computers and some whiz kids. And then and to be able to make transactions with it. So you set that system up, but then once it's rolling, you can put money into it very quickly and create money around it. The government says, this is our money. And this is US dollars. And we don't, in a monetary reform system, we wouldn't have the Fed as it is today. It would be a real public administrative system. It's a privately administered through the banking system itself. But that making it public doesn't solve it. The Bank of England is public and it doesn't solve the problem. It's that the private banks have a stranglehold on the system. That's the problem. But central bank digital currency, if they put that money in, it's like the greenback. It's the money of the country. And when people move that money around, it stays in the community and it moves around. It does transfer wealth around. And it can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing because we don't know right now how they're going to set it up. So there's a whole half of the monetary reform communities thinking about this. It says that CBDCs are bad. And the other half are saying, no, it's a way forward because it stops for every one of those dollars. It stops the banks from creating money in terms of their accounting system with the Federal Reserve.
Okay, who's next?
It's George, Charlie, and then
I'm George, here.
All right, George and then Charlie.
Of the rise of the East, that's Russia, China, Iran, the rise of the East and the decline of the West, especially the US dollar. They're trying to weaken the dollar.
The dollar, okay, let me
Back up.
give it to you this. The dollar is something we use, and we have sort of a special privilege. It backstops the whole system. The Fed gives money to the Swiss, the German banking system, all the others to back them up when they need it, which they did during the Great Recession a decade or two ago. Because it's our Fed that stops it. So therefore, there should be a privilege. There should be a privilege with that. Well, that privilege shouldn't be with the US dollar or any one country. That privilege has to be the whole world. And that's why I pointed out Franz Verhoeven's book, The Tierra, or some international solution. So there's No, there's the ways you don't have to have an international dollar. We can have what I call a parity tariff, and that would be another explanation, but that works with farmers, making sure prices are okay with farmers internationally, and there's a way to do that. But that we'll have to invite you back for a farmers conversation for that. But there's a way to do it. But the dollar only creates a secondary form of colonialism. You're already colonized by our banking and our financial. We're all colonized by that system already. The difference between us and, say, people in the Philippines is they're double colonialized. They're colonialized by their banking system, and they're colonialized by our banks and the IMF and our rich people lending money to their country. So it's a big game, and the rich get richer, but not the poor. Should there be a dollar hegemony? I don't support it anymore.
Okay, I think we got Charlie going next, so Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah, Steve, are you in favor? I believe you can open up a savings account at your local post office in Great Britain. Are you in favor of expanding the role of the U.S. Postal Service in terms of personal banking, so I don't have to go to a private
That's an idea, Charles.
profit-based
Yes.
bank?
Yes, yes, and yes. Should we have postal banking? Yes. It's similar to the banking that we would have had during the colonial period. It's the government and it's Pennsylvania's assembly had it with their colonialists, and money would circulate. They would pay money back and they could lend it more out. And they could do that. You could do it with postal banks. And right now we're thinking of doing it digitally, or the Robert Hockett is one of the great thinkers, is that we could all have accounts with the Treasury. The Treasury knows how to do it. They're fast. The Fed is very slow in working, but they can do it. And they've done, how many transactions can you do it in a second? MIT has worked it all out. So we know how to do it. China's doing it for 280 million people right now. It's an easy thing that needs to be done. But your question is, what are we going to do about the US dollar? Well, the US dollar is in trouble for sure in 10 years. But now with Trump, right now it's happening much quicker.
Okay, Jake, go ahead. We'll get you next. Jake.
Okay. Okay. Hi. My question, just to follow up, similar question. You're advocating for public banks. How would you do that, and who would control it, and and if so, would they be run as a non-for-profit, and how would you protect them from corruption?
There's good history. Well, one is I'm not necessarily advocating for public banks, but public banks is much, much better than what we have today. I'm advocating for a neutral money. And so if private banks want to continue and stay in business, they just can't create public currency anymore. They can't create our money, and they don't get the first use of it. They don't get the first use of our money. Government, or we in a UBI, Universal Basic Income, get the first use of money, not a private group of citizens. So that's how I'm against private banks. But if a private group of people want to become a bank and to loan out their money, they can have that right to do it.
Okay.
Now, let me get back. So Jake's made an interesting question though on money banking and what are the difficulties with it. Sparhausen banks in Germany, there's kinds of public banks in Germany. One is many city districts in Germany have public banks. They are extremely successful. They've learned how to do it. So we have good models. In rural Germany, they have another type of cooperative bank, a nonprofit type of bank, and those two can be very successful. And they're helping green their farmers with horizontal energy conversions. So if you want to, instead of heating the air, let's get some water from the ground that has a ground temperature of 56 instead of the outside air temperature of 10 below and heating that. So let's be smart how we carry on our business. And they can think of the future and work towards a better future. And that's where we need to be doing better. But yes, banks can be accountable. China, it's People's Bank of China banking system, because of in 1948 when they took over and they never really lost that central bank, that banking is extremely efficient. And it's right in Marvin King's book, his opening page says, it's him working with a Chinese counterpart where they say, yeah, you've got to do banking, you have quite a history. We do banking, I think we do it pretty good. We do it good. And they're making a joke for themselves, but yeah, the Chinese do banking in a beautiful way, in a lot of ways. Now, are they greedy? Yeah, they're greedy. Are there corruption? Yeah, there's corruption. There's problems, but we can learn and do it better. Much like the Quakers in the 1720s looked at what happened all up in, the Northeast and said, well, we can do it better for that. We know how to take care of our citizens. And they had the least inflationary money system anytime in U.S. history and for any colony, because they've decided to do it right. And we can do it right today for our farmers, and our farmers are suffering badly. So that's one more reason why I don't worry about the hegemony of the dollar, because we failed ourselves already.
All right, would you mind up now? We're going to our infamous rebuttal period. You go ahead, sit down, or we can get that taken care of. How many of you are going to want to make a rebuttal tonight? We got 2, 3. I know, Charlie. We'll go about 4 minutes online here. And if you make a rebuttal, please come on up to the microphone on the speaker, and we'll go 4 minutes apiece. I'm sorry about the trouble with the microphone tonight, but we should be better next week with the introduction of another system. So our first speaker is George, and he'll go about 4 minutes. And let's give our speaker a hand again tonight. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. All right, you're set, sir, and go ahead.
What would shock if this hasn't had to, that home in Chicago is typically averages $400,000. I didn't realize that. But what I wanted to say is Elon Musk claims he can save the U.S. government $2 trillion in wasteful spending. Some examples: $520 million for woke environmental investments in Africa, $260 million for George Soros-backed investments, $45 million for diversity, equity, and inclusion programs for Burma. I agree that waste and fraud should be ended. However, Musk wants to cut $800,000 from Medicaid. Trump has also fired many federal workers without cause. I'm a Trump guy, but I'll say when he's wrong. Trump povertizes Americans while he and his family's net worth balloons through unregulated cryptocurrency. His son he's doing most of that with the crypto, and they're going to make billions.
Hello?
All right.
Hello?
Who wants to go next? No one? Charlie, do you want to go?
Oh, I just want to thank our speaker for a nice overview of the current economic policy. And we haven't discussed this topic in some time. The only thing I may have missed it, but Congressman Kucinich was, if one last question, where he can answer at the end, maybe advocating some sort of legislation. Is there any legislation that he would advocate, such as that by Congressman Kucinich? Anyhow, thank you. I want to thank the AMI. It was a good, and please come again sometime. Thank you very much.
Who's got another rebuttal? Anyone else? I guess I'll make a rebuttal. So I'm still kind of unsure how any of this money gets value, if it's not backed by something. I wasn't really satisfied with the answer that was provided. It didn't really answer the question. If the government gives you, piece of paper, it says it's worth something. I don't know if it's only worth, I guess, because the government makes you use it. I don't know that there's still no exchange of value there, really.
I can give you an answer.
Come up after, and you can do that. So explain to me like this. Let's say you have, I don't know, let's say you have, for whatever reason, like 100 gold coins. That was all the money that was there. And then you make dollars. Each dollar is worth a gold coin. Well, that way when you're using your dollar, theoretically it's backed by something, and you can exchange that dollar for a physical piece of finite material, something. If you're going to increase the money supply and you still have that same 100 coins that's supposed to be tied to that money supply, that dollar is you're just kind of, I don't know, it's kind of it's counterfeit. I just don't know other way to explain it. I'm not sure how it can't be any other way, but I'm curious to hear if somebody else can explain it. But that is all I have. Thank you.
The dollar is backed by the U.S. economy. It's the value of the U.S. economy.
Going once.
I suppose I can do this. Okay. This is yeah, I'm gonna try to do point by point with this thing. So this is a comparison between colonized group and a group that's like decolonizing. Now I'm gonna need my glasses. Cheers, sorry.
Well, if you want to go up with the mic and explain.
Who's next? Who's next?
He's talking, but he needs his glasses.
Okay,
Especially yours.
yeah, we're doing rebuttal. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, we can't hear the sound.
Money creation.
Oh, the Zoom.
But this is
Can't hear.
money creation.
I know, we gotta bring the mic over right now. I gotta fix that problem with the computer.
Money creation is part of this group of like this is an area in this book that describes what the difference between a colonized economy and a decolonizing economy, and it's just described by point. It goes, if you have a colonized economy, you have privatization to remove assets from the public domain. Privatize the banking and credit system is the key to transforming real estate, natural resources, and basic infrastructure, mainly to political insiders. Now, these appropriators are expected to find their interests lie in selling their shares to buyers in the United States and Western Europe at prices that leave substantial leeway for capital gains. So what Michael Hudson contrasted that with public ownership of natural monopolies, especially money and credit creation privileges to prevent their monopolization in the private hands resulted in rents. Yes, privatization of basic utilities, so people can like healthcare, education, and things like that. And these are actually like natural monopolies, say electricity, things like that. If you privatize them, then people try to, like with the healthcare system or with like education, then people are going to try to make a lot of profit off of that. And there are things that we all need. The way to counter that is to keep basic infrastructure, including banking, in public hands to provide essential services such as transportation at subsidized prices for freely minimizing the cost of living, providing high quality education and healthcare as a basic human right. This will prevent them from being turned into vehicles for monopoly rent seeking and financialization under private ownership and management. So this group of stuff is like, so in the like colonized group, you have privatization to remove assets from the public domain, privatization of basic public utilities, minimal regulation to protect labor, consumers, and the environment, permitting creditors, landlords, and employers to maximize rents and profits, dependency on foreign money to create credit. This is like if your money is.
Sir, your 4 minutes are up.
Okay. No worries. So this is a book right here, and it goes point by point in this group, or what a colonized economy looks like, and what a decolonized economy looks like. That's here. The book is called The Destiny of Civilization.
I want to talk a little bit about Republicans bailing out the super rich again, creepy cryptocurrency, and terminologies like printing money and seigniorage. I haven't heard that term in a while. Okay, so very concerned about Republicans again printing $5 trillion taxpayer money and giving it to the super rich. Does hardly any help to the general economy. It helps the super rich. They don't need the help. So it's a form of trickle down economics, if you've heard that term before. So that's a big concern, is printing money, printing $5 trillion. This is what they're talking about again, in taxpayer breaks for the rich. Okay, so that's that. Okay, if you look at your dollar bills, it says "In God we trust." Our dollar bills have some backing. Our banks have some backing. Our government has some backing. Corporations, Target, that's backed by stocks and bonds. You got actual real assets. Your houses are assets. Creepy crypto, it's thin air. You're on your own, pal. If it ever goes away or crashes, And it has no guarantees, no FDIC, none of that. But you know, people jump up and down because people are trading it back and forth. They have too much money, and you know, they're just making money on speculation. So I'd be curious to find out. I think you told us why, but there are countries that have outlawed creepy crypto. China, that's pretty shocking. A well-managed economy like China, I mean, it might be, you know, communist, it might be over-controlled, socialist, too regulated, but somebody's thinking about creepy crypto there. Seigniorage. My understanding of seigniorage has to do with printing money. So, you know, when Bush and Cheney and Halliburton spend $6 trillion in debt to pay for oil wars, when Obama prints $10 trillion for Wall Street, Trump printed 4 or 5 trillions last time. He's probably going to do it again. And it's all debt. That's our huge debt. And what seigniorage, I think, is that in the banking system, now I have an economics and finance degree. I'm not going to be super perfect here, but the Fed or the Treasury gives money to different levels of banks. They rented out money to, you know, from the Fed. They have an interest rate to the so on and so forth. And then the money the banks can make when they lend out is that percentage of seigniorage where they got free money or low cost money, and then they're making more money on interest when they loan it out to other people like us. So actually, I don't have a problem with monetary policy in the Fed. That's why they got to stay independent. And hold on, just one more minute, okay?
No, Bill, we're under time constraints.
What do you mean? You got
We still got Jake, and then we got Charlie, I'm sure, and then we got I'm sorry, Jan.
Wait, monetary policy, fine. It appreciate monetary policy. You know, the interest rates control the inflation, and it works fine. So we don't have a problem with it. Now, when it comes to fiscal policy and politics, like Trump,
All right, yeah.
Trump printing money.
Thank you.
Yeah, all right, you
Yeah, when politics get
okay.
involved,
All right, Jan, you're next, then we'll go online afterwards.
all this debt is a shame.
All right, Jan, you're next, and then we'll go online to Jake and Charlie. Just don't worry about it, Jan. Just
I think saying that when money is just printed, it means debt, and we're all in debt, and it's us that's going to have to pay for this in the long run. I really appreciate people pointing that out, and I think it's true. But I just have two little stories. One was a friend of mine who, you know, is kind of out of it, and she's talking to this guy on the train, and he's saying, he's telling her about his investments in crypto, and trying to explain to her what he's doing. And she finally said to him, "So what you're telling me is that your activities have absolutely no social value whatsoever." And I mean, she understood what he was saying, and she realized that there was no social value involved in it. And can I remember the other story I was going to tell you? Oh, damn. Let me think just a second. Well, it's gone from my mind. So I have to stop at oh yeah, I remember. I needed to buy a car. And so I found a car I could afford, and I went to the bank to borrow some money. And it was the bank I've been banking with for 30 years. And they loaned me some money at 11.5%. Well, you know, I'm old and I don't remember that a loan required 11.5%. So I paid it off from my savings account immediately so that I wouldn't be paying any 11.5%. And then the bank sent me a thing in the mail saying, we are offering you a wonderful interest rate on your money. It is going to be 0.5%, more than any. And I thought, you're loaning out money at nearly 12%, and you're offering the people who will guarantee to put money in an account for 11 months, and you're offering them 0.5%. And this was before it got up to 5, but this was, a few years ago when there was no interest. And I was just outraged. So I called my bank and I said, this is outrageous. Please stop sending me these offers. Well, the offers kept coming. They kept saying, oh, we're going to pay you 0.6%. And I was furious. But then I found out that the people who process the people who process the savings at 0.5% really have nothing to do with the bank. It was a separate thing, and they were using the bank to advertise, so that when I wrote to the bank and asked them to stop sending this, they couldn't, because they weren't the ones that were to me. The whole thing grossed me out so bad, I can't even tell you. I was very, very angry about it.
Okay, all right, we're gonna get, you wanna go, we're gonna get Charlie next. Charlie, hang on.
Everybody, criminals over
I know you got something to say, and then Jake. So, Charlie, you feel free to do your 4 minutes and, go ahead.
Okay. Okay.
Tim,
Hi.
Tim,
No, Jake, we're
Oh,
gonna go.
Charlie first? Okay.
All right, Charlie.
oh, Tim, I've already spoken, Tim.
Yeah, okay.
I've already spoken. The only thing is, I think I can answer Justin's question. We don't need things like something backing the dollar, because the dollar is backed by the solidity of the United States economy itself. That's what's backing up the dollar, is the U.S. economy operating efficiently. That's what's backing up the dollar. And the concept of gold or something else is actually kind of old-fashioned, I think. That's all. Thanks again to the AMI. Please come again.
All right, Jake, you're on next. All right, Jake, you're on. Unmute and you're next, Jake. Unmute, Jake.
Okay, hi. All right, thank you for inviting me to the kindergarten tonight. Thank you for your talk. For the issue of counterfeiting was raised before, so I saw a movie several years ago entitled The Counterfeiters, I think at the Music Box Theater. It's based on a true story of a Russian Jewish counterfeiter, Semovich, I think his name was, captured by the Nazis in 1944. They didn't hurt him. They put him to work printing up money for them. The idea was to print up U.S. dollars and British pounds and by the thousands of them in an attempt to wreak havoc on the Western economy. And he was real good at it. All of his funny money looked like the real thing. This guy was real. They're not just making it up. Anyway, on the serious side, we were talking before about the FDIC, and you said that if banks didn't invest in speculative items like stocks and bonds and so forth, we won't need the FDIC. Well, that's not realistic. The reality is that they do invest in stocks and bonds and so forth. The last time there was a big economic crash was in 2008, and the whole reason for that was because 10 years earlier, in 1998, during the last 2 years of the Clinton administration, they repealed the old Glass-Steagall Act. Glass-Steagall is a law that dates back to the Roosevelt era, separates the investment banks from the commercial banks. And so they repealed it in 1998. Only showed up 10 years later when the economy, just 3-4 months before the election, the economy, the economy practically, the whole economy practically crashed. And so after Obama, that's one of the things that led to Obama's election in 2008. And so after Obama got in, they passed a financial reform package, economic reform package, which contains some of the language of Glass-Steagall, but is very watered down. And it sought that with the way Trump is tampering with the international economy and with the FDIC and so forth, it could lead to another big crash, which could be worse than what happened in 2008. Let's wait and see what happens.
Jake, is that it?
Yeah.
All right, anybody else wanting to speak or rebut tonight? Okay, seeing none, we're gonna let you get your last word in, and you can take up to 10-15 minutes if you need to, but let me get you behind a mic over here so we can see you fully.
Thank you, Tim.
Just right this one.
Okay, good. No. Howard. Okay. Let me try to get to some of these points. One was this lady brought up the idea of money as a liability. And on the Fed's balance sheet, it is a liability. It's considered a liability. When scholars recently, Mitsoli Omarova, Michael Kumoff, and those are two of 6 great speakers or thinkers about money and modeling money. They said money isn't really a liability and it's not really a credit. It's something in between. It's neutral. And so I would suggest to you, you could think about money. When money comes into circulation, you can think of it as social equity. And what Joseph Huber, this great German sociologist who's very concerned about these problems too, he says, we should have a register for society. And the register can be with the monetary authority, being at the Treasury or a central bank, whatever is going to have the authority. And in that register represents the public government putting money into circulation. And that's our money coming into circulation so that money can circulate around. What I would like you to think about in that way is think of the spaceship Enterprise or Next Generation, but you see that spaceship and it has all of these floors and it's very complex and big. And you want to get supplies and money or energy, the things that people need to work on that spaceship, there has to be enough of it. So that money and that register that comes into circulation, the purpose has to be of money is to give people work so they can do their bit to help society in whatever way that is. And that's how we need to think about money rather than as an object for gain. So money shouldn't be thought of as a liability or a credit. We should think of it coming in as part of it like social equity and using it for healthy food, healthy ground, healthy soil, healthy air, healthy water. Get rid of the oil companies. They've told us they're recycling the plastics, but why do we have all of this micro amounts of plastic in our water system? I read somewhere there's a teaspoon of microplastics in our bodies and actually even in our brains too. So we need to use our social equity money to get public things done, and so we can work on it and take care of ourselves. One gentleman brought up Elon Musk and all of the troubles of the rich getting rich. Yes. Many people brought up comments, and I would agree with them. Yeah, that one point though, that the idea of how money needs to come into circulation has to be different than how it is now. I think it was Wes or somebody who brought up this colonialism. Well, they went to Michael Hudson, and he was reading from The Destiny of Civilization. And Michael's really interesting. Not only did he work with this Michael Hudson, the author, because he wrote those first two books. In that book, he had two lives, basically. One at the Peabody Museum, and he was this great scholar of monetary history in the Middle East of the earliest times, but also in the late 60s and early 70s, he was a financial advisor to Chase Morgan, and he had to decide how much money they could loan to Chile, to Brazil, to Vietnam, and Argentina. He had those four countries. And there'd be a law of fraudulent conveyance. And what you had to do was you had to, a corporation, you couldn't make a loan. And this came back from the American Revolution. When during the American Revolution, you had creditors in England. So they lost the war, but they still had all of this power. And did they lose some of their investments? If the colonists decided, if you gave a loan and you knew they couldn't make it, couldn't repay it, that was done with ill intent, and that loan's forgiven. That was some of the intent going on. More research needs to be done on this. But with the ideas then behind internationally for jubilees, it started in the year 2000, and I'm thinking of Kennedy, there was someone associated with Kennedy who married into the Kennedys, who is for jubilees or poor countries. And the idea is if they can't pay their debts, the bank, the World Bank and the IMF tends to extend it and try to make it work. But it just keeps these countries in debt, and it doesn't help them find a way out of debt. And we need to have a system where you don't have to have countries in debt like that or people in debt like that. And we need to come up with new ways of thinking. So anyhow, so he, looking at Mesopotamia and the beauty they had under this like Garden of Eden I read to you a bit about, he took those idealisms and says we need to have those ideas again of a debt jubilee and keeping people out of debt today. Can people willingly go into debt for doing these small things? And yes, they can. But at some point, we as society need to think about how to care for everybody. I think that'll be good enough for now. Thank you.
And at this point, our college is officially adjourned. I'd like to say thank you to everybody who showed up tonight, and those on Zoom. Jake and Charlie, thank you again for coming, and all of our guests. It wouldn't be productive without you guys coming out to listen. So I'd like to say thank you to all of you fans for coming out tonight. And with that, our college is officially adjourned.
Okay.